Welcome back. It's a new year, a new episode, Ruling on the Field. I'm your host, Seth Mendelson, alongside my co-host, Sam Mendelson. Sam, we obviously missed a week, but a lot's happened since then. First topic, let's talk about the number one team in the NFL, the team that has secured the bye in the AFC, the Baltimore Ravens, who can't be stopped. They have been dominant. They look dominant against San Francisco, the best team in the NFC, arguably. They look dominant against Miami, the second best team in the AFC. What are your thoughts, Baltimore being that top dog in the NFL? What were some of your takeaways from that game against Miami?
Well, first of all, the question of who's winning MVP is gone out the window. Lamar Jackson
100%.
Wins the MVP. He did it 2 weeks ago in San Fran and just further cemented his legacy. When he won the first MVP, it was mostly about what he was doing with his legs and the excitement and the spins. Remember that game against the Bengals where he had that move where he was cutting through the middle and then just spun around the defender and went like another 40 yards for a touchdown. Everyone was like, that was it. That was the moment. There were so many moments in the last few weeks, and it was from the passing game. Like Lamar really, with the new offense, with the way it was set around, they bring in Zay Flowers through the draft. They bring in Odell Beckham Jr. They lose Mark Andrews, but they haven't really lost a beat with Isaiah Likely. I mean, this is a team, again, that lost J.K. Dobbins right out of the gate. And then they had Keen Mitchell, who was this up-and-coming young stud. They lose him as well. And then it's really been Gus the Bus in the goal line, and everything between the 20s has been Lamar with his arm. And yes, he's still using his legs, but this is a team where I was very high on them pretty early on the gates. I mean, we were talking about the Ravens. I said, this is a team. Roquan Smith is their leader. This is a dog out there. And you look at both the Harbaughs. You got John Harbaugh, the number one seed in the AFC. You got Jim Harbaugh going as the number one seed in the college playoffs. And then they beat Alabama, so they're going to the national championship. So what a feeling for both the Harbaugh brothers. But this is a Ravens team. The last time that they were in the Super Bowl was the Harbaugh Bowl, San Fran, Baltimore. We could get another look at that. You said arguably they beat the best team in the NFC. I think it's without a doubt. Even though I'm wearing a Cowboys hat, without a doubt, the 49ers are that team. And the Ravens punched them in the face, and then they punched the Dolphins in the face. And it was just very impressive to watch. Both sides of the ball, they're really dominant. And now it's got to go through M&T Bank Stadium, one of the tougher stadiums, in my opinion, to play in the league. And they're going to have a week off with that bye. There's a lot of things trending upwards for the Baltimore Ravens. And now you get this game against the Steelers coming up where they're probably going to rest their players, but also want to really stick it to their AFC North rival, Tyler Huntley, coming in. We'll see what he does in that Saturday afternoon game, because there's a bigger Saturday night game that we'll talk about in a second. But I just love what the Ravens are doing. And I've really liked from the beginning to end how consistent they've been. We talked about some of the games that they've beaten their opponents. They killed Detroit. They killed Seattle. The Rams came in and put up a good effort. They won in overtime on a punt return touchdown. But they have been dominant throughout this year against some good competition.
And you think back, if you even start before the season, like if you look at the trajectory of this Baltimore Ravens team, where there was a potential, Lamar Jackson was almost not going to be the quarterback. They were potentially going to move part ways, and they give him the contract, they pay him. Obviously, as we can see, you can make the argument now that it wasn't even the right value. He probably deserved more money the way he played this year and balled out, but they paid him handsomely. I don't think either party is upset with that. And they start bringing in some weapons. They sign Odell, they draft Zay Flowers. And then in week 5, the first matchup against Pittsburgh, we saw what kind of looked like, challenges in this offensive scheme where they were dropping catches, there were missed opportunities, and they lost to Pittsburgh in their first matchup in a very tightly contested game. But ever since then, I feel like this offense has been clicking. They've been really solidified within their weapons. And we've always said this about Lamar Jackson. If you gave him the weapons, who knows what he could do? We always knew Mark Andrews was there. But what I really saw from that game against Miami was everyone working. Rashad Bateman looked great. Zay Flowers, 75-yard touchdown. Isaiah Likely came up big with 2 touchdowns. Odell had this incredible catch on the sideline right at the 1. Like, everything was working. Justice Hill, you mentioned. Gus Edwards was punching it in. The weapons around Lamar, like, he's absolutely elevating everyone in this offense. The O-line's incredible. You mentioned the defense is already great, and when you give them a lead, which they've been in these, especially the last 2 weeks, but most of the season, that defense really clamps in and they get turnovers and make big plays. But what I'm seeing with Baltimore is, I should say, just, incredible football. And I think the one defining play for me in that game against Miami was 4th and 7. You're in field goal range with Justin Tucker. Because pretty much everything is field goal range for Justin Tucker. We're talking about the GOAT of kickers. And it's not even short yardage, but they decide to go for it. Isaiah Likely, 1-handed yard catch, ends up taking it to the house for 30, 35 yards, touchdown. Like, that play, the epitome of what that play stood for was the confidence they have in this offense, and getting that, first of all, is big. And them actually doing it, scoring, getting a touchdown out of that play, everything about that, I just think when a team is clicking both offensively and defensively, they are a threat, and there's a reason why they are the clear Super Bowl favorites going into the playoffs.
And we talked about some of the weapons that they've added and some of the moves. I think the one that goes unnoticed is the offensive coordinator. I mean, they had Greg Roman there for a couple of years. He was 1-3 in the playoffs. And again, a lot of that was that design run where they would have the fullback and they'd have, Ricard, and they have the line, and they would all kind of move in one direction. Lamar would kind of follow them. You don't really see a lot of design runs. I mean, in the last couple of weeks, too, against San Fran, against Miami, what I'm seeing is Lamar extending the play and then realizing the best option is to run for a first down or to get it. There are design runs because when you have a talent like Lamar, you're not going to not use his legs, but it's less. And Todd Monken, that came from Georgia. I mean, they were back-to-back defending champions, but rarely do you see a college guy take that leap and be such an instrumental part to that offense. And we've seen it on some of the Sunday night football games, whether it was the Chargers against the Ravens or when the Ravens, again, played against the 49ers. You heard Collinsworth talk about the play design. It was always like 60-40 to run, and now it's kind of reversed. And because of that, Lamar's going to win an MVP. Again, not because of his legs, but because of his arm. Defensively, Roquan Smith, top 5 in tackles. I mean, they got Geno Stone, who's been, outside of DeRon Bland, the best ball catcher in the league defensively, or the best ball hawk, I should say. But really, when it comes to that offense, and we talked about some of those injuries. Odell Beckham, Zay Flowers has really stepped up. Isaiah Likely. I mean, you got guys, Bateman's been playing really well as of lately, that they do have these pieces, but it was all so dependent on Lamar and his legs. Now we're seeing what he can do with his arm. We're going to see if they rest their players, which most people think that they will. They'll have 2 weeks off before a meaningful game at home against a team that's going to come off a win. Does that play a factor to you, Seth? Do you want Baltimore to play some of their guys early, or because there's been so many injuries in Baltimore this year, you just want to avoid any injury catastrophe, that you just roll out the second string guys? Whatever happens against Pittsburgh, and then you hope in 2 weeks that everyone's healthy and ready to go. Like, I'm curious your thoughts on, now that there's only one team that gets a bye, does it benefit them when they don't have to play a meaningful game in that final week to play their starters?
The only way I can answer that is by saying Bradley Chubb. Like, you don't want something like that to happen to your team. And yes, obviously you want those repetitions. Those games are great to have. You don't get any type of, or the best experience you can have is in a game. You can't get those types of, scenarios. You can obviously simulate it in practice, but when you're going up against another team, especially a team who, Pittsburgh, they're playing, it's a game of survival for them, right? They have to win. So this is not the moment where I want my key players to be going up against a team that is thirsting, that is craving this win, that it will do anything it takes to win that game. I rest my players. I think you've got 2 weeks to prep, to get your mind right, to get your body right, to recover, to go in when you come off that bye week and you figure out what your matchup is, to go in at 100% with your whole team. I don't want to take that chance, And it's honestly it's a great transition. As I mentioned, Bradley Chubb, and we saw what happened in this Baltimore-Miami game. And I want to talk about the Dolphins now because, that game was far, like it was over. Like it was, there was no reason for any of their starters to be in. Bradley Chubb ends up tearing his ACL and is now out for the whole playoffs. A guy who was pivotal as an edge rusher for this Dolphins defense all year round is a huge loss to them. And, obviously I kind of, when I mentioned it to answer your question, like you never want to see a good player go out, but when there was no reason for him to be on the field and now this is what you have to, now you're playing problem solving this situation, that's not good for any organization. That's a bad decision in my opinion.
No, it was really bad. This is a team that lost Jalen Phillips a couple weeks ago on that Black Friday game against the Jets. He tore his Achilles at MetLife. But that was a game that they were, it was first half or, they needed that. It was like a game that mattered. They were down 49-19 with 3:45 left in the fourth quarter. Like, to your point, there's no reason. Look, we know football, there's going to be a myriad of injuries. We've seen quarterbacks go down left, right, and center this year. We've seen a lot of guys go down to bad injuries. Mark Andrews went down earlier in the year talking about the Ravens. It made zero sense for me or anyone, if you're a Dolphins fan too. You go into this game Baltimore going, wow, we can win. We can really control our destinies and get that first seed, get that bye. That would be huge for us. Tyreek's been banged up and you're getting blown out. Like at no point was that game ever close. Mm-hmm. And Tua was off. The offense didn't look in sync. Baltimore was just, like you mentioned that play on the 4th and 7, like Baltimore was like imposing their will. And then with 4 minutes left, like there's no reason for you to send out your top guys. Now your best rusher is Andrew Van Ginkel, which I love his story on Hard Knocks. I love what he's about, and he's a guy who's going to play, whistle to whistle. But at the end of the day, Bradley Chubb was your guy. He was having a great year. He's also your leader on defense. When you look at what they have, I mean, I know they've got Wilkins and Sider up front as the defensive line, but Jalen Ramsey is one of those guys where he does a lot of trash talking, but he's not really a vocal guy. He just kind of does his job and does it, well. Bradley Chubb was that guy who, we saw his frustration a couple weeks ago against the Titans when he thought he could sack Will Levis and he smashed his helmet. He got a 15-yard penalty for, throwing down his helmet on the field, but it kind of rallied the guys. Even though they lost that game, they rallied them. They played very well against Dallas a week later. So I'm very curious to see. I haven't seen the Hard Knocks episode, how that all plays out, but you got to think Mike McDaniel was questioning himself, and now they're going to play the Bills, who we talked about it. I mean, the Dolphins have locked in a playoff spot. Very well, they lose, they're going on the road, but the Bills have to win this game. Who do you like in this game? Do you think Buffalo, I mean, you were at the game against the Patriots last weekend. I don't know what type of offense we're seeing. Defensively, they look good, but I don't even think you even knew this. Von Miller was a healthy scratch set. He had 3 tackles. Wow. I think Stephon Diggs has more tackles this year than Von Miller. I saw a tweet. I'm going to double check that when you give your point, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. They gave him a huge contract. He was great for them last year. He's had some off-the-field issues this year. He was a healthy scratch. Buffalo's defense did look good against New England, but we're talking about Bailey Zappi. What did you see from Buffalo, and do they have a chance to beat Miami, who's going to come in, playing at home, wanting that number 2 seed and wanting to knock out their AFC East rival Buffalo Bills?
Yeah, even just that statement or that stat about Stephon Diggs having more tackles just tells you everything about that you need to know about the Bills, and that's there's a lot of turnovers that happens in a Bills game. They can cause a lot of turnovers, and they can force a lot of turnovers, and that was very much what I saw in this game against New England. They do not play perfect football offensively. They make a lot of mistakes. I was in the bathroom and all I heard was one guy's just like, that's Josh being Josh, man. That's what they are accustomed to as Bills fans. He can run it in. He can make these electric plays, these highlight reel plays, but you also kind of know that almost in any moment in any game, he's just going to make a bonehead decision that you're just questioning, that you just don't understand how he keeps making these repetitive, like, it's like, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. How many times is this guy going to keep throwing it into double coverage, thinking he can force it in and get picked off? And he did it again against New England. And, the thing with the Bills is I feel like when in certain matchups, when they come to play, no one can beat them. We've seen it with the Chiefs. We've seen it with the Cowboys. Like, there are certain times where you see this type of Bills game or Bills team that is just like, oh, they're a Super Bowl contending team with what you're seeing on the field. But what I saw against New England was not that team. Yes, their defense had caused 4 turnovers. One of them went for a touchdown in the first half alone, and they were only going into the half up 20-14. That does not make sense. That is not a Super Bowl winning team. Does not keep that margin close when your turnover differential is so in your favor, right? And that's what I'm seeing. I saw a lot of, there was just the offense wasn't in sync. It seemed, I mean, obviously the game started with a kickoff return touchdown, which was wild, and the entire stadium was
silent. Video of it.
Yeah, I was in great seats to witness that, and I was behind the Patriots sideline, and they were going nuts. But yeah, I think there's a lot of questions that I have, a lot more questions, I should say, of the Buffalo Bills than answers. I think they will come to play against Miami, but I think I like Miami's story. I like McDaniel. I like Tua. If Tyreek and Waddle can be healthy, like we haven't seen the Cheetah and the Penguin healthy together in quite some time. They've been both battling injuries on and off. And if you get them both in sync together, I think there could be, and they both have big games, that offense is pretty electric. Also, let's keep in mind that Raheem the Dream, who has been incredible, having a franchise-setting year, career year, was not in the game last week against Baltimore. That's a big addition to that offense. But, I'm someone who believes defense wins championships. But if you're Miami, it's all about that offense. That's what's taking you to that promised land.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, I don't know if you made your call on who's going to win the Sunday night game 272. I'm going with Miami.
Yeah, I'm going with Miami. Sorry.
And I think, as much as I think if you're a team in the AFC, you don't want to go against Buffalo because we've seen Josh Allen ball out in the playoffs and lose, and we've seen him ball out and win. I remember a game against the Patriots at home where they had 40 points. It was just an absolute domination. This whole year for the Buffalo Bills has not made sense to me. I mean, Stephon Diggs hasn't gone 50 yards in 5 of the last 6 games. 50 yards, Stephon Diggs. I don't even know how he got to 1,000 yards. Defensively, they fired their offensive coordinator. Then they started using James Cook more. The last few weeks against the Chargers, they barely got through by Easton Stick and Bailey Zappi. Sure, there are wins, and they'll at the end of the year, you'll just say, oh, there's a W beside, the Chargers game and a W beside the Patriots at home. But they lost to the Patriots earlier in the year. Nothing really makes sense. And then there's this whole story with Von Miller having less tackles than Stephon Diggs. What happened with Sean McDermott a couple weeks ago, the stories about, 9/11 and I'm not going to go into the details. But when I look at the Bills and the Dolphins and I match them and I look at quarterbacks, I'd say Tua had a bad game, but Tua's been the better quarterback. He's been the quarterback with the less turnover ratio this year. Running backs, I give it to Raheem and Devon A-Chain. Wide receivers, I'm giving it to Tyreek. I don't know if Jalen Waddle is playing, but I think anyone Tyreek goes up against, he's going to beat this year. Tight ends, sure, Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox. I haven't really seen a lot of Dalton Kincaid the last few weeks. Offensive line, defensive line.
He had a good week last week. Yeah, it went for 70-plus yards.
Oh, he had a big catch. I remember it was a 40 catch. So, okay, so tight ends I give him. But, when I'm going down, and then ultimately at the last line, I'm looking at, special teams and coaches. And special teams, I think the Dolphins have the edge. Clearly, the Bills giving up that kickoff return to start the game, not really a good sign. Braxton Berrios has been good for them in the punt return game. And then I go to head coaches. And, again, I'm like the story with Miami, too. Every time I watch Hard Knocks, I'm so impressed with Mike McDaniel.
Yeah.
And I just know everything in Buffalo's kind of just in shambles. And I just know that you got a guy who's calling the offensive plays for Miami and the defensive plays for McDermott. And that's going to be the matchup that I'm looking forward to the most is who's going to be having the better schemes. And I just think Mike McDaniel is going to come more prepared. They're playing at home. There's not really that Miami Stadium benefit or that advantage because during the day when it's a lot hotter, it makes sense that the opposing sideline is going to be a lot hotter. But at night, prime time, it's going to be a cool atmosphere. I mean, I'm excited to watch. It's a great game. But moving from the north to the south. Lots of stuff going on in the AFC South. The AFC South set. You got the Colts hat. They've got a big primetime Saturday night game at home against the Texans. It's the Texans, it's the Colts, and it's the Jaguars. But it starts on Saturday night. Set us up for that big Saturday night marquee game.
Yeah, I mean, when you're making the schedule in the NFL and you put that Houston, Indianapolis in the last week, you were almost hoping that it was going to be like Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud fighting for this big game. Now, we don't have Anthony Richardson, but we do have this very exciting game where when you're in, lose you're out. It's as simple as that. And, you know, as a Colts fan, I've been through this before. 2 years ago against Jacksonville, worst team in the league at the time, lost. A couple years before that against Tennessee, we won. So this isn't anything new for me, but the level of surprise that I have to see how the disparity in the AFC South. I thought going into this year, this was a cakewalk for the Jacksonville Jaguars to win the division. You had 2 rookie quarterbacks, 2 rookie head coaches, I'm obviously prefacing by saying I didn't think Tennessee was going to be good this year, and they, you know, definitely lived to my expectations. But
lack of expectations, you mean?
Well, if I expected them to be shit, and they were shit. But I digress. You know, to see Houston and Indy both fighting for their lives is so exciting. This AFC South is going to be so fun to watch for years to come. These are young teams, obviously new head coaches. It's going to be a very exciting game in Indianapolis. When they first played against each other, Anthony Richardson was playing, ran for 2 quick touchdowns, got hurt, left the game. Gardner came in. And you know what? I'm going to talk about my Colts. Obviously, we're seeing the horseshoe on my hat, horseshoe behind me. There's 3 reasons why Indianapolis is in this position where they can win, and they're in, potentially even win their division, because Jacksonville going up against Tennessee, it's not a cakewalk. Tennessee wants to play spoil. They want to spoil the party of Jacksonville and be the reason they don't make the playoffs. They are going to be at home too. I believe Ryan Tannehill is going to be in because I think Will Levis is still hurt, but we'll monitor that. And Mike Vrabel's going to get his guys fired up to win that game. It is not going to be easy for Jacksonville. But going back to Indianapolis, you start off, this head coach has changed the culture of what this team's identity was. He believed, and he made everyone believe that they can be a winning team. That was big. But one of the biggest things that he did, Sam, was he kept Gus Bradley, defensive coordinator. He kept some continuity on the defense. And what has that led to? Zaire Franklin, franchise record in tackles, playing like a lot of the players on the defense grew. Kwity Paye, Dayo Adeyangbo, both have 8 sacks. DeForest Buckner, still that center core. Like a lot of these players who were on the defense last year leveled up because of that continuity. Another big reason that they're in this position was some key offseason moves that at the time I didn't realize how big it was, but Gardner Minshew obviously being the biggest. I mean, having a backup quarterback to come in and win these games is huge. Samson Ebukam, he's 9.5 sacks. They needed an edge rusher for so long to play with DeForest Buckner. He's now provided that and has really reshaped this defensive line. But the biggest one, Matt Gay. This Indianapolis team lost a lot of games last year because of their kicker, and they spent big on Matt Gay. The reason that they beat the best team in the league, Baltimore Ravens, earlier this season was because of Matt Gay hitting 4 50-yard field goals. Completely something that we don't talk about a lot, is the fact that Indy beat Baltimore, one of the 3 teams to beat them. But all of these decisions and all of these ingredients has led to Indianapolis at home, chance to win it. They've been great at home. Jonathan Taylor, obviously, like that whole fiasco at the offseason is far behind us. He's now got 6 touchdowns. He's looking great after a fantastic game against Las Vegas. So there's a lot of exciting momentum for Indianapolis. I really think they can win this game. And I'm going to say it here, Sam. Obviously, there's bias. I think they're winning the division. I think Jacksonville is going to lose to Tennessee. Indy's going to win Saturday night. We're going to go in with a home game in the playoffs, and it's going to be great in Indianapolis. for the shoe, baby.
I love the enthusiasm. I love it. I mean, you talk about a couple things defensively. They kept Gus Bradley. One of my favorite players on Indianapolis has been Kenny Moore, and I thought last year he had a down year. I think he's really stepped up, and he's had a really productive and solid year. You talked about some of the other things. Gardner Minshew was with Shane Steichen in Philadelphia, right?
Yep.
So he brings him over knowing, hey, we got a rookie quarterback that we're going to start. They pretty much announced pretty early on Anthony Richardson was going to be the guy. But in this league, especially this year with all the quarterbacks going down, you need a good, serviceable backup. And outside of Joe Flacco, Seth, who, again, was on his couch a couple weeks ago and what he's on in Cleveland, I don't think there's been a better backup quarterback than Gardner Minshew. Houston won a game with Case Keenum, and that's what you kind of need with that plug-in guy that's going to come in. Cowboys showed it last year with Cooper Rush winning a couple games as well. But Gardner Minshew has played very well. And this is, again, you talked about a lot of things that happened with Indianapolis. They had a top 5 pick. They took a franchise quarterback who looked fantastic out of the league. He goes down for the year. But there wasn't really a lot of optimism about what this team was going to be like. You talked about being a cakewalk. If I told you before the year Anthony Richardson was going to go out, Jonathan Taylor was going to miss a bunch of games, and the team was going to release Shaq Leonard, you'd go, okay, so 5-12, that's where 6-11, maybe they get a couple games. We talked about some of the games that they could have won against Cleveland at home. They were only one of 2 teams to beat Baltimore at home this year, right? Like Cleveland got that fluke win as well, where they came back. Deshaun Watson, I think it was his last game with the team. And, for the fact that Baltimore lost to Indianapolis, I remember Michael Pittman making a great catch, taking a helmet-to-helmet hit in that place. He's taken a couple of those this year. But, yeah, you talked about some of the additions that they've done. I think it's outside of the Miami-Buffalo game, it's the other game I'm most excited to watch. Yes, there's a win-in mentality, which makes it ever more exciting for a football fan, and very stressful for a fan of that team. But you're playing at home. You got to love that. They've been a much better home team than they have been on the road. And, yeah, you talk about Matt Gay. He could come down to a Matt Gay game-winning field goal. And I think he's had 1 or 2 games where he's looked a little off. He's missed a couple field goals. But for the most part, he's been hitting those clutch kicks. And you trust him in those situations. And the team trusts Shane Steichen and what he's been able to do. I think, without being said, not just to play the devil's advocate, I do want to give a lot of credit to what C.J. Stroud has done this year. 100%. He's going to win the Offensive Rookie of the Year. He loses his best weapon in Tank Dell. He's still making plays with Nico Collins and Robert Woods time to time, Dalton Schultz. Dameon Pierce came in as the running back. It's now Devin Singletary. He's got a lot on the line with a couple incentives in Week 18 that I know that Houston's not really caring about. They want to win and get in as well. But DeMeco Ryans has done a fantastic job. And really that defensive line for Houston is going to be that matchup between, the offensive line and the defensive line for Houston, offensive line for Colts. That's the matchup I'm really most intrigued because I think the last few weeks, that defensive line has been ferocious. Will Anderson has really stepped up his game. They're making plays. And again, you can look at who they faced over the last few weeks. But outside of that Cleveland game, they've been very dominant. And I think that's going to be a very interesting sign. We talk about it all the time in football. It's a battle inside the trenches. But if the offensive line can get enough pushback, Jonathan Taylor should have enough game. And then you're obviously working on 2nd and 3rd and short, which is better because any quarterback will tell you if you're 2nd and 3rd and long, it's become a much more treacherous way to get first downs. And I love what the Colts have, but, Alec Pierce and Josh Downs, they're still up and coming. Pittman is your playmaker, and obviously Houston's going to focus on Pittman and on Jonathan Taylor. You're going to need plays from a guy like Mo Alley Cox and Kyler Granson. And
it's Will Mallory these days, man.
Will Mallory. That to me is going to be the unsung heroes that are going to show up, and those anytime touchdowns. I want to take one guy like plus 1,800. Maybe it's Will Mallory, but that's really where it's going to come down to me is that defensive line for Houston and the offensive line for the Colts.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Games in this league are won in the trenches. Now, when we're talking about offensive line, defensive line, games being won or lost in the trenches, let's talk about your Dallas Cowboys Detroit Lions, which was probably the biggest controversy of the year with what went down in that game, primetime Saturday night, talking about offensive line winning the game, an offensive lineman reporting getting that 2-point conversion only for it to get called back. And again, the evidence speaks for itself. I don't know what was said, what was heard, what the refs, decision and mentality was behind all of that. But from what I saw, they went to the ref, said something, assuming they reported. Play happens. They get it. It's a success. Probably would have won the game. I think there was still some time on the clock, and Dallas could have done something, but it was very much that was for the game. Sam, this was such a roller coaster of an experience. Obviously, as a Cowboys fan, you're happy with the outcome, no matter how it happened. You can't determine, what the refs do, why you win, why you lose. You've been on the opposite of some pretty bad ref calls in your life as a Cowboys fan too. You'll take the win, and especially after Philadelphia got upset by their former defensive coordinator in the Arizona Cardinals, Coach Jonathan Gannon. You're now looking at a potential home game going into the playoffs with the number 2 seed.
Well, the reason I'm excited that they won. Obviously, as a Cowboys fan, you're always excited. You'll take a W when you can get a W, but it's the Cardinals beating the Eagles that have really made this even more, insane, because Cowboys lose that game and the Eagles losing against the Cardinals. The Eagles still in the driver's seat. They got to, go up into New York, into MetLife, face, I guess, Tyrod Taylor, because they benched Tommy DeVito. Even though Tyler Taylor did play well against the Rams, and the Cowboys go in another Week 18 against the Commanders, where last year they just looked horrible, and hopefully now that they have something on the line, they can actually be like, we need this. And yes, I mean, look, there's billboards in Detroit saying, today that's saying Decker reported. Micah Parsons went on his podcast, and again, I'm taking the side of the Dallas Cowboys. He said that the ref announced that 70 was eligible. He didn't say 68. So when 68 caught the ball, he knew immediately that the flag was on Detroit. Now, I've never played professional football. I watch it religiously, but I've never played it. I do know that, and we hear it all the time when we go to football games, 70 is reported as eligible. The crowd knows it. The defense knows it. It's not necessarily that the play is going to be thrown to number 70 or number 60, whoever reports as eligible. It's to let everyone know that this guy could catch a ball and he could make a play. We've seen plays where the offensive lineman somehow ends up with the ball in his hand and he runs down the field, and it's like, you're not eligible to do that. Like, you can't. Yeah. We saw a crazy play against Miami last year where the offensive lineman hurdled let the one go. It was a penalty because he's not eligible to do that, right? So we've seen that happen over the course of, the last handful of decades, where offensive line, J.J. Watt, 99, reports as eligible. The way it's set up is you got to have guys on the line. Everyone's got to be lined up and against someone. There's illegal formations. We're not going to go into the minutia of every play, but the point I'm trying to make is that there has to be some sort of precedent. The thing that I didn't know about, and Rex Ryan said it online on ESPN, and Dan Campbell said it after the game, is the coaches go up to the referees and basically tell them their trick plays. He said in this way, to a T. He said, we're going to have plays where 70 comes in, 68 comes in. They're both going to report as eligible, this and that. All of that, I had no idea. I thought you literally just send the lineman to the referee or the umpire or whatever and just be like, I'm eligible. And then they go, okay, 70 is eligible. And then you're like, okay, there's potential of a trick play. I didn't know that was all done beforehand. And what's crazy is, again, for the sake of timing, I'm just going to try and boil it down. The Lions had 3 chances for a 2-point conversion. After the penalty, they could have kicked an extra point and won the game in overtime. I know that's not Dan Campbell's way, but they were 5 yards further away, and it would just make sense to go to overtime. Then Micah Parsons gets called offside, and they get another chance to do it. And they didn't run a very good playoff for the third 2-point conversion. Dallas had really bad clock management. I mean, they had the ball under 2 minutes. There was also another questionable call in that game that no one talks about because it was overlooked, but Adam Schefter talked about it. There was a play when Dallas got that interception with just over 2 minutes left, where the next play, Dallas got called for a 15-yard tripping penalty.
I saw this. Rodgers brought it up.
It wasn't on the Dallas Cowboys. It was on Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah.
And they called it on Hendershot. They have the same last name initial, but that to me is a huge play as well, because obviously if Dallas loses and that comes out, I'm fuming. And obviously if you're a Detroit fan, you're fuming the fact that it looks like he called eligible. I mean, this umpiring crew with Brad Allen, who was the umpire crew, I don't really know. They've been on the center of a lot of controversy. They were there for the Marquez Valdez-Scantling game in Green Bay. They made a very questionable call. They're apparently doing the Pittsburgh-Baltimore game, or not apparently, they are doing one in the playoffs. The umpires and refereeing crews get mixed and matched, but they've been the worst all year. And for this to come out, like, we should be talking about playoff matchups. We should be talking about how great that Dallas and Detroit game was, how tight it was. CeeDee Lamb, legacy game. Like, we should be talking about breaks Cowboys records. Like, he's up there with Tyreek. He could pass Tyreek if Tyreek has a bad game and CeeDee goes off for 900 yards for the most receiving yards. People are talking about Tyreek for 2,000 yards all year, and CeeDee might have the most receiving yards. Yet we're talking about two or one specifically play that was not based on what the players did, but on the refereeing. Look, I think Detroit got screwed. I'm going to be honest with you, but clearly there was a report after the game. He said 70's been reporting all game long, and then when both of them went, you even see Jared Goff say, "Go report, go report." I don't know how you could come away with that if you're a Lions fan and say that makes sense. And Mike Casano's podcast was like, I didn't expect them to go for 2 again, but I guess they had nothing to lose. No, the Lions had something to lose, because if the Lions won that game, they move up from the 3 seed to the 2 seed with Philly losing, and they don't have a chance at the 1st seed, but they have a chance to get the number 2 seed, which is better chance for a lot more home playoff games as opposed to the number 3 seed. So there was something at stake. It was crazy. Look, to me, Dallas still hasn't played a really good game in about a month. They played very poor against Buffalo. Miami, I mean, they had some great moments, but they came up short, and then that fumble at the goal line kills me. Tony Pollard has looked very anemic the last few weeks. And then against Detroit, I mean, I was kind of expecting like a 35-31. I thought this defensive battle was more surprising to me, but, Dak made some plays. Dak also didn't make some plays, and Jared Goff turned the ball over a few times. So there was questions on both sides, but as you said, I'll take the win. Philadelphia losing Arizona might be the biggest surprise of the week. A lot of issues going on in Philadelphia. They have to win and hope Dallas loses to get that number 2 seed. If not, Philadelphia is going on the road this year, and Kansas City has to go on the road this year, as they'll probably be the 3 or 4 seed, and don't have that first round bye. So a lot of interesting storylines to monitor as we move towards the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think there's an element of human error that is in the NFL. And as long as we have referees that are not robots, that's going to continue to happen. There are mistakes that are made. I remember I saw this one video. It was like the guy was down basically by a first down, and then they spot the ball 2 yards behind where he went down. Like, it was just like, we've seen mistakes happen this whole year. You can look back at the Kansas City game. Like, there's a lot of controversy that's happened, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversation when the season's all said and done. But
quick question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, if you have a question, you can jump in.
I saw online that every play in the fourth quarter should have a booth review. Like, when it comes down to it, like when the game's on the line, fourth quarter, just want to get your thoughts. Like, first 3 quarters, things like that happen, move the ball yard, all that stuff like that. You have to challenge it, whatever. But in the fourth quarter, everything should be booth reviews, because it just seems like everyone's talking about the umpiring and the refereeing and the missed calls this year. And it happens a lot over the last few years. I think about the New Orleans Rams playoff game and the missed, defensive pass interference that was so blatant. Fourth quarter, everything is under scope, and doesn't matter, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
You can make that point. That's definitely one way that they can go about it, maybe try and correct it, or they can start loosening up the rule of what can be reviewed. Also could be something that they can look at, but I'm not going to go into all of that. That's going to be, there are greater minds that will work on that. The point that I wanted to make is, you mentioned it. This game could very well be a huge indicator in the divisional round when maybe Detroit's going into Dallas for a rematch. There's a very good chance that Dallas now, who by winning that game controls that home field game rematch game against Detroit. Again, who knows what will happen, how the playoffs will unfold. But when you were Dan Campbell and that play that should have been 2 points doesn't happen and you get the penalty, you had the chance to force overtime. And how you won that game, no one's talking about that play call in the same degree. You had every chance that you could have to force overtime and still won that game. Because if if that does happen, then we're not talking about, the what ifs, or, that narrative isn't the same level. It's not the same magnitude. But he decided to go not once, not twice, but 3 times. He went for 2 points and failed all 3 times. So that's going to be one of those decisions that, again, like, we've always known that Dan Campbell has the cojones to do it. He's bold like that. He's been bold. He ran a fake punt earlier in the game too,
Yeah.
and it was really well executed. But that could be one of those decisions where if that rematch happens in Dallas, we'll definitely remember that play even more. And I want to, as we're wrapping up here, get to our final conversation, because as we've been talking about the Detroit Lions, there's been a lot of interesting things happening in the division, but the most interesting one is that it is official. The Chicago Bears, who traded the first overall pick last year to Carolina, who moved up to get Bryce Young, now has another first overall pick with that Carolina Panthers first round pick. We can make a lot of comments about the owner, Tepper, who just got fined because he had a whole altercation with the fan. I don't want to go into the abomination of the Carolina Panthers 2023 season. What I do want to talk about, Chicago Bears. You now have another chance at a first overall pick with a generational quarterback potentially being in the draft. So the question is, Sam, do you keep that pick or do you trade it away and believe in the future of Justin Fields? And we'll start with you.
Yes, this is our 2-minute warning question. Should Chicago move off Justin Fields or should they stay with him? And my side is we are going to stay with Justin Fields if I'm the Chicago Bears. And here's why. I think Justin Fields is the second coming of Michael Vick. When I see what he can do, and you saw it last week, he made a play where he should have got sacked for 6 yards. He got out of it, and he ran for 13 and a first down. He's making plays with both his arm and his leg. He's had some great moments with DJ Moore, who's well over 1,000 yards. I mean, this is an opportunity where you talked about it's a generational talent. Now, last year, they traded a lot, the Carolina Panthers, to get that first overall pick. I don't know if anyone was saying in the draft there was a generational talent. I think Bryce Young was supposed to be a good quarterback, and maybe down the road he will be. I think people were high on CJ Stroud. I just didn't expect him to be as good or as flashy as he was. Will Levis was kind of that, okay, he's good. And I've seen some nice moments from Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. For the brief moment that I saw him, I thought he was great. But there was no generational talent that people are talking about in Caleb Williams. From what I've understood and what I'm looking at as a full scope, you trade Justin Fields, you're not getting a first. You're getting maybe a second and a third, or a third and a player or a prospect. You could go into this draft, the cards on the table, and you could say, New England, you're at 2, or New England, you're at 3. You want Caleb Williams? You want to move up? Give me a bunch of picks. Move down to 3. Get a guy like Marvin Harrison, who might be the best player in the draft. Right? You put him with Justin Fields. You put him with DJ Moore. In the backfield, Khalil Herbert's been good, but you have so much cap space. You have so much opportunity with that first overall pick that, from what I've led to believe, and I've seen reports in the last week or so, you're going to get way more than what the Panthers traded for in terms of what the Bears got for that first overall pick. So I look at this and I say, you keep your quarterback and you see what the fans want, right? Like I always think of draft day in some situations like this where it's like you see what the fans want. They want you in Seattle. They want your head. You want to get Bo Callahan. I don't bring up draft day for a second time on this podcast, but I just saw the movie again. I'm just like thinking to myself, I'm like, the fans were chanting, "We want Justin. We want Justin." He was asked after the game, he goes, "I love the city. I love the fans. I want to be here." And he knows it, right? And maybe he's been told things behind closed doors, but everything that he's done, they could go and face the Packers and knock the Packers out of the playoffs and win 3 in a row. And all of a sudden, Justin Fields finishes at 8-9 in a year where, had he not been hurt and they not go to Tyson Bagent, they could have been a playoff team and still have the first overall pick. And I just think what I see from Justin Fields, there's some small decision making, but with a better coach, I know Eberflus was a former Colts coach, but you got to get him out of there. They've got a really good base in terms of what they have. the cap space, the draft capital. I think this is an opportunity where you say, we trust you, Justin. Let's build around you and see what you have. And let Caleb Williams go to New England or go to New York or go to wherever he may be. I think this is the place for Justin Fields, and I think that's why they stay with him.
No, I think those are all very good points. Keep in mind, this is a Chicago Bears team that traded a second-round pick for Montez Sweat, so they're clearly wanting to win now. You don't make that decision if you're necessarily thinking of a rebuild, right?
They have some nice pieces.
But I'm going to look at the other side, and this is assuming that Caleb Williams enters the draft and is okay with being drafted by the Chicago Bears, because we now live in an NFL era where they can declare, or they don't have to declare, because they can still make enough money in college football. You may even make more money in college football. But if you're Chicago Bears and you have wanted and thirsted and needed a Super Bowl, you've got so much history rooted in this team, you have a chance to get a guy like Caleb Williams, who, if he even lives to a fraction of the hype, we're talking about a perennial career. Like, this guy, what he can do, the way he extends plays, the arm. I believe the Bears had a chance to get Patrick Mahomes and went with Justin Fields, and they've always kind of like fans.
Trubisky?
They took it was Mitch Trubisky's draft, right?
Yeah, Justin Fields was after, but yes, they took Trubisky over Mahomes.
Right. Always regretted it. Here's a chance. Here's a chance that you can correct that. Here's a chance where you can bring in a guy who, it doesn't matter if you have DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, he's going to get the ball to them. He's going to extend plays. He can immediately impact your team, do things far better than Justin Fields. You're talking about Michael Vick. Michael Vick was great. He ran the ball. Justin Fields runs the ball. Caleb Williams can run the ball, but he can throw the ball way better than them, and he can extend plays, and he can even run almost as good as them. Like, Caleb Williams has all the pieces that you want. He, from a quarterback perspective, obviously you don't know until he plays in the NFL, but in sheer talent alone and what we can see from arm strength to body size to speed, he beats Justin Fields in all of those categories, if you ask me. The only thing he doesn't have is that NFL experience. And I think if you put him on the team, you get a new head coach. We're seeing a playoff contending Chicago Bears team with Caleb Williams. I still don't know if I believe that in Justin Fields. Yes, he's had moments where he's definitely looked great and this offense has clicked, but how many times do you want to keep going through that same conversation? It's like, oh, he's not there yet. Oh, maybe one more year, maybe the next year. No, you can get rid of all those conversations. You can get the guy who might be one of the best quarterback prospects since, you can make the argument of Trevor Lawrence, but I would even say since Andrew Luck. Like, that's how big and how great of a prospect Caleb Williams is. You put him in Chicago, fans are happy, team's clicking. Could be a pretty exciting time in Chicago. So that wraps up our 2-minute warning. It also wraps up our first episode of the year, but we're talking about the last week of the NFL season, Sam. It has been a very exciting time getting to talk with you each week about the NFL, what's going on, and we'll continue as we enter the playoffs, because this is the best time right now. We're talking about January football. Who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be unpredictable. It's going to be exciting. And yeah, is there anything you want to say on top of that? Because I just can't wait. And it all starts for me on Saturday night. First playoff game of the year right now. Indy, Houston.
Without further review, that's the ruling on the field.